worth talking to.
You know, I recognize I'm on the clock, so let's do it.
Let's fire away.
All right. The election is 6 days away. I saw, Mr. President, a recent Pew Research poll that said among Republican voters, compromise is not a virtue. They value politicians who stick to principles rather than those who compromise. And you'll not be surprised to hear that that's what I hear often from my radio listeners. So the question is this: if control of the House changes, as now appears likely, and it's brought about by voters who want to put the brakes on you, how are you going to govern for the next 2 years?
Well, first of all, I think the only poll that matters is going to be on November 2nd, and I still feel confident that it is a very close race in terms of the House. You've got close races all across the country, including in your hometown. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens, and a lot of it's going to depend on turnout. Having said that, there's no doubt that voters across the board, I think, want to see Washington work. They don't want games. They don't want posturing. They don't want business as usual. They want us to focus on them, on jobs, on the economy, on keeping small businesses open. And my expectation is that Republicans, should they win additional seats, should they be in a position to hopefully take more responsibility working with us, are going to say to themselves that it's important for us to show some accomplishments over the next couple of years. And I think there's some areas where traditionally we've had bipartisan agreement. I'll give you an example: infrastructure. Traditionally that hasn't been a Democratic or Republican issue. We should have the best infrastructure in the world. We used to have the best roads, the best airports, the best rail systems. We don't anymore. And it's important for us to, I think, put people back to work right now, doing the work that America needs done. And that's the kind of thing that I think we could get bipartisan support. The same is true on potentially reducing our debt and our deficit. Everybody agrees that we have to get control of our deficits. I think us working together, Democrats and Republicans, with a responsible plan that makes sure that we're protecting those core investments like education that help improve economic growth long term, but also eliminating wasteful spending, is something where we should be able to get some agreement.
Well, I'm glad you raised the deficit, Mr. President, because on the subject of the economy, I've been watching, and it seems like the Brits have thrown under the bus one of their own in John Maynard Keynes. And, Keynes was the proponent of deficit spending by government to avoid recession. And what occurs to me, sir, is that while your approach has been an $800 billion stimulus, over there they're raising the retirement age, they're making $130 billion in spending cuts, and they're eliminating 500,000 jobs. Which begs this question: why isn't that the right approach for us?
Well, keep in mind, first of all, that they had a big stimulus program over the course of the last 2 years. So actually, Britain has taken the same approach that we have, and most countries have taken the same approach, which is that in crisis, when you had a complete collapse of the economy and jobs were being shed at a pace of hundreds of thousands a month, that it was very important to make sure that the government was able to provide a backstop and allow businesses to heal and recover. Now, we've done that over the last 2 years. The question is, what do we do going forward? And our problem has not been as bad as Britain's in terms of debt relative to GDP. Our problem is a long-term structural problem that has to do with the fact that we've got an aging population. We've got a bunch of entitlements that are very expensive and are very popular. People like Social Security. They like Medicare. I think that those are pillars of security for people in the retirement age, and so we have to make sure that those are there for future generations, but we've got to make sure that we make some adjustments so that those programs are in place. And I think that we can responsibly set a pathway where over the course of several years we are reducing our deficit without endangering economic growth, without endangering the core investments that are required to make sure that the American dream continues, and without completely shredding our safety net.
In a word, what I hear from listeners on a day-to-day basis is angst. And you talk about the American dream. I was raised to believe that, of course, if I worked hard and had a good education, I would further those achievements of my folks. What I hear from people is a concern that that's no longer the case. They're fearful that their own children will continue to exceed their own opportunities.
Well, look, we've gone through a tough decade. I mean, obviously we've been focusing mostly on this brutal recession that we've gone through, the worst since the Great Depression. But between 2001 and 2009, middle-class families saw their income go down by 5%. During that period, job growth was more sluggish than any time since World War II. So middle-class families have every right to be frustrated and concerned. And the answer is going to be making sure that we are doing what we've always done best, which is innovate, have a dynamic public sector, that a private sector that is investing in new plants and new equipment and hiring new workers. We've got to have a government that is lean and mean, but also making important investments that foster long-term growth. I already mentioned infrastructure, making sure that we've got the best education system in the world. We used to be ranked number one in the proportion of college graduates. We now rank 9th. We now rank 21st and 25th, respectively, in our math and science education. Those are all critical changes that need to be addressed, and we have begun addressing them over the last 2 years. So, for example, we took away tens of billions of dollars that were going in the form of unwarranted subsidies to banks, and we made sure that that money was going into making student loan programs cheaper so that more people have access to college educations. That's going to be critical for our long-term growth. I will say this is an example of the choice that we confront in this election, because my colleagues on the Republican side right now have said that they want tax cuts for the top 2%, the wealthiest Americans, and that would cost $700 billion. And they have no way of paying for it, but part of the way that they're suggesting to pay for it is to potentially cut education by 20%. That's not a smart way for us to get our debt and deficits under control. We don't want to undermine those things that help us grow over the long term.
But I guess that's the reason why I brought up the British model, the British example, is because what I hear from folks on a day-to-day basis is they want to see some corresponding reduction of federal spending. You know the perception of those that you most need to reach. The perception is that the spending is wildly out of control.
You know, the truth of the matter is that the budget that we've set up, where we've proposed freezing non-defense discretionary spending, if we followed that program, would mean that non-defense discretionary spending, everything other than defense and security spending, would actually be lower as a percentage of our GDP than any time in 50 years. So we've each year have identified billions of dollars in cuts and wasteful spending. I am somebody who firmly believes if a federal program isn't working, it should be cut, it should be eliminated. And as I said before, part of what we have to recognize is that over the last 2 years, we had a brutal recession and a critical crisis that had to be addressed, and that did increase the deficit. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we would have seen hundreds of thousands of teachers laid off, hundreds of thousands of firefighters and police officers laid off. This isn't just at the federal level, it's also at the state level. We had to help them because their budgets were getting decimated by the severity of this recession.